Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this special episode of Talking Point. Today in our studio we have Dr. Charles Tannock, an MEP from London. He represents London and he looks after the affairs, foreign affairs and human rights. And welcome to the show, Dr. Charles.
Thank you, Niaz.
It has been a busy day for you. You have traveled from Brussels to London and you were at the House of Commons today for the whole day and you made time for us. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure.
My pleasure to be here, and it's my first interview on NTV television.
It's a great honor, sir. How do you explain to our viewers what is the European Parliament? Because there's a lot of ignorance or probably misconception. But in this Parliament that we have elected, you have been elected from London, eight of you, and some 500 million people have voted to elect 785 members, you see, from 27 member states, you see. What do you do?
Well, it's a unique parliament in the sense it's the only directly elected parliament which makes laws in the world. There's nothing quite like it, and on paper it shouldn't work. In theory, it has 23 official languages, and they're all interpreting away. In practice, of course, English is the language which all the aspiring and ambitious politicians use. And if anything, it makes too many laws. So one of the roles that I see as a Conservative member of the European Parliament, MEP, is to try and keep the laws to a minimum so that Europe does less and does it better. And
do you have an edge over others because you can speak Spanish, Portuguese and French and Italian?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's quite useful socially, and it's quite useful, in the corridors to chat to colleagues in their native tongue, and obviously it opens up certain doors for you. But the official businesses of the Parliament are conducted in all the languages of the countries. So in theory, you can be an MEP and speak no other language whatsoever. I would say that probably a smattering of French is still helpful if you want to order a coffee, because the local staff often still use French. But English is the working language of the institution. And I've seen it grow from strength to strength. I've been a member of the European Parliament now since 1999. It's my third term in office. And it's gone up in terms of power with the Lisbon Treaty, which is now up and running. The European Parliament acquired a lot of new powers, including powers over trade for the first time, which is why I get constant streams of ambassadors, foreign ministers, trade delegations at my door seeking support on trade agreements. And we've got one being negotiated at the moment with India, of interest to your viewers. There's one that's about to start with Japan. There are free trade agreements with countries like Colombia and Peru. And so this is an area where the Parliament's gained real power for the first time.
You have agreements with Bangladesh too, but that
we have, but those predate, and they're not a free trade agreement. They are kind of cooperation agreements, and they're really to do with allowing access of Bangladeshi goods. It's more of an asymmetric one, so the Bangladeshi goods can come our ways that we can't export in the same way. A free trade agreement would be flows of goods and services both ways without any restrictions. I don't think Bangladesh has quite got to that stage yet. Because
we will.
Hopefully you will, because I'm a strong believer not only global free trade and between EU and other blocs, but of course regional integration. I think that the way forward in South Asia is for the South Asia.
How do you manage being in the two bases, like from Brussels to Strasbourg and back to Brussels again?
Well, Strasbourg is a bit of a nonsense. MEPs from all parties in the United Kingdom are opposed to Strasbourg. We were in Strasbourg last week, and it was the first time ever that we managed to put two sessions together in 1 week. So we had an extended week ending on Friday. Normally it ends on Thursday with two sessions. The French were very angry about this. They're appealing against it to the European Court of Justice, but it was a British Conservative MEP, Ashley Fox, who changed the calendar of the Parliament and insisted on having two sessions, so we only do 11 rather than 12. And the idea is to reduce the Strasbourg presence because it is a complete waste of money. It costs about 200 million euros a year extra, awful lot of pollution from all the lorries going backwards and forwards with all the trunks with our goods and our files. It hasn't got a good airport, and it really makes no sense. It's all about the historic peace agreement between France and Germany. Strasbourg was a city of peace and reconciling the two countries. But already you see there are generations born who can't remember the Second World War. There are countries in the European Union who were never part of the Second World War. So we have to move on. So we have a very strong campaign to have one seat for the Parliament in Brussels, where all the other institutions, the Council of Ministers and the Commission are based. That's our ambition as British MEPs.
As an MEP, you have to travel a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to go backwards and forwards to Brussels.
Strasbourg, Brussels, and then back to London.
Your constituency, wherever that is. In my case, London, I'm very privileged. 2 hours. I mean, it took me, I was in Brussels this morning, 1 hour, 55 minutes, and I was in central London. I'm lucky I represent London. My colleagues who represent Scotland have to fly, or Northern Ireland. They have to change often planes in Paris or at Heathrow or whatever. So London MEPs are particularly lucky because there is a direct, fast Eurostar going through the Channel Tunnel. In less than 2 hours, you are city to city. And I always say, actually, an MEP for London is more privileged than, say, a member of the National Parliament for Manchester or Scotland, because the trains are very crowded, Eurostar is very comfortable, and to be frank, for the time being, we still go in business class, but that will probably be taken away from us fairly soon, I suspect, as part of the cuts and the austerity measures.
Going back to life before MEP, you are a doctor, a psychiatrist, and you have been lecturing. You were a senior lecturer at University College Hospital. You were also involved in writing about anxiety syndrome and other related diseases. How did you manage to break into politics?
It was quite a shift. A lot of people think I was somewhat unwise to leave a very safe and secure profession. My wife sometimes complains she met a doctor and ended up married to a politician and doesn't see that much of me because I'm always traveling. I've always been involved with politics, even as a student. When I was at Oxford, I used to be a member of the Oxford Union. I then joined the Conservative Party when I came down to London as a medical student. I got involved with youth politics. I was vice chairman of the Young Conservatives in central London. I then ran for the local council and was elected at the same time as being a consultant in the NHS, a senior lecturer, and doing it all at the same time.
That was from the Royal Borough of Kensington and
Chelsea, yeah, in central London. So in the 90s, I was juggling with many different balls at the same time, both being a local politician and a doctor. And I reached the sort of advanced age of 40, and it was either carrying on forever in the medical profession or doing something completely different in my life. I was lucky because I spoke a few European languages, and they were looking for new faces. My party lost the election badly in 1997. So they were looking for people with different backgrounds, because traditionally most politicians tend to be either businessmen, bankers, barristers. There's often a very limited professional background that they are recruited from. And doctors were very few and far between in all political parties, in this country in particular. So I tried my luck for the European selection in 1998. And to my astonishment, I was selected near the top of the list, number 2 for London. I've never looked back. It's been a great honor and a great privilege, and it's been a fascinating job, because there's no other job quite like it as a politician, where one day you could be knocking at the door around here, say in the East End of London, talking to a housewife about the problems in her local community, what's happening with transport, health, education, policing, and then the next day I could be receiving or meeting a prime minister, as I have met, for instance, both Khaleda Zia and Sheikh Hasina when she visited this country. So it's a remarkably varied and diverse a job, being an elected politician, and there's never a dull day. And I've carved out an interest, and I am the spokesman on foreign affairs and human rights. And of course the European Parliament again has grown in terms of its powers and influence in this area over the decade that I've been a member of it.
You have also had the opportunity to go to Bangladesh during the last elections as an observer. What were your impressions when you went there?
Well, I tell you what, I mean, I didn't know what to expect, because although I had been interested in Bangladesh because I was one of the founders of the Conservative Friends of Bangladesh, and I'd met many of my Bangladeshi constituents in London, I'd never been to Bangladesh. and I led a team of 4 MEPs as observers for the last parliamentary elections around Christmas time. And I was absolutely fascinated by what I saw, the sophistication and depth of the culture, and most importantly for me as an election observer was the degree of fondness and appreciation of democracy, how important the elections were. People were queuing up to vote, which in this country the turnouts are going down every year, every election. You know, from being sort of 80 or 90% 50 years ago, they're down to 60% for national elections, only 35 for European elections.
Why is that happening in this country?
Because we are taking it for granted. Whereas I think in many countries, like, you know, for instance, Bangladesh, the right to throw out a government is something which people regard as a huge privilege and something which they've fought for and something which they really appreciate and cherish. And I really like that. And I also made an interesting observation, which I remember saying to your press at the time, in Bangladesh.
You wrote an article reviving Muslim democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a huge supporter of Bangladesh as one of the most progressive, modern, secular powers in the Islamic world, where women, you know, have an education, where, you know, there is active and
there's no gender bias.
No gender bias, and what really interested me as well from a election observation point of view was that you had a very robust system of elections. I mean, in the sense that I actually said that there's possibly more electoral fraud going on in this country because we have a very lax system where anybody can register, anybody can vote with no controls. In Bangladesh, it was a very strict system. People went in to the polling station.
Now they have an ID.
They had an ID. They had a photographic ID against every name. It was a very, very fair, very rigorously policed system. And people were queuing up to vote, and people were really excited about the election, and they really felt they were participating in their civic duty. Whereas, sadly, in this country, less and less people are getting involved with politics, less and less people want to vote. And I think that's very dangerous, particularly in this country where you might get extremist parties with motivated people who will fill that vacuum if we're not careful.
Right. You wrote Bangladesh is a country with human potential, but that potential can only be realized by making poor people's needs, which Islam around the world have previously made their own political territory. The new government's top priority is to fulfill the needs of the poor people. See? Your involvement with the Bangladeshis and the Bangladeshi government, do you think that we have been able to achieve in these last 4 or 5 years?
I mean, you know, I think that Bangladesh has had quite successful, in spite of all the world global austerity, credit crunch in 2008, Bangladesh has managed to carry on with a 6 to 8% growth rate. Okay, from a very low base. But, you know, you are now part of the next series of countries in Bangladesh which will be regarded as great investment opportunities. And I was very pleased to hear and read about the fact that Begum Khaleda Zia has just been to India and been well received and has relaxed some of the traditional hostility of the BNP towards India, because I do think that the way ahead for Bangladesh is to have better relations with its giant neighbor. India is a country which we all take very seriously. It's one of the great emerging powers, a democracy, and you know, a global economic powerhouse. And Bangladesh cannot afford to be divorced from that market and that trade opportunity.
On this positive note, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about how we can better our relations with our neighbors in South Asia. Don't go away. We'll be back soon.
আপনারা দেখছেন টকিং পয়েন্ট।